Welcome back to our channel where we provide updates and undisclosed narratives on Catherine, Princess of Wales and her royal family. We provide you with the exciting news. Prince William's emotional breakdown follows DNA test, confirming decades-old secret of Princess Diana. Kensington Palace is apparently engulfed in an atmosphere of unparalleled turmoil after confirmation from people close to the Prince of Wales that a private DNA test has substantiated a long-rumored mystery about his late mother, Princess Diana. The disclosure, characterized by one insider as dynasty-altering, reportedly induced an emotional collapse in the heir to the throne, Prince William, whose evident turmoil has reverberated across the usually impenetrable confines of the royal family. The arrival of the sealed findings disrupted the tranquility of a calm Tuesday morning at the palace. What began as muted conjecture among a select group of top aides escalated into a comprehensive constitutional and personal catastrophe. The contents of a solitary, inconspicuous envelope have, according to various accounts, not only validated a fact that Diana took to her grave, but also posed a potential challenge to the fundamental principles of the contemporary monarchy and the line of succession. For years, the royal institution commonly known as the Firm has diligently endeavored to quell rumors about Princess Diana's stormy existence and untimely death. Rumors were deliberately suppressed behind layers of official formality, philanthropic obligation, and the meticulously crafted public persona of her sons. However, the inconspicuous item that arrived on Prince William's desk had the potential to obliterate the whole foundation. Sources indicate that the prince retained the envelope for an extended duration, his reluctance conveying significant meaning. This was not just paper and pen. It was the culmination of decades of distrust of murmurs that had reverberated through royal halls since his youth. A palace employee requesting anonymity characterized the atmosphere as suffocatingly tense. The silence was deafening, the individual said. It seemed as if the walls were acutely aware of the stakes involved. Servants averted their eyes and counselors fidgeted anxiously, but none had the audacity to disrupt the tension. It was all his burden. For Prince William, a man rigorously prepared from childhood to exemplify poise and govern with steadfastness, the burden of his mother's legacy seemed insurmountable. As memories of her surged, her joy, her suffering, and her enigmatic admonitions that the crown was perpetually deceptive, his demeanor ultimately shattered. In a moment of unfiltered humanity, the future King of England shed tears. His tears were not just for himself, but also for a mother he loved, but could never quite comprehend, and for a reality she had been forced to bear in solitude. Before the public could comprehend the significance of Prince William's revelation, it was necessary to revisit the obscured aspects of Diana's life where this horrible truth first emerged. What knowledge did the Princess of Wales possess that she refrained from disclosing to the public? Why did she leave a series of hints that have just recently been revealed via the objective perspective of science? The origin of a concealed truth. Diana's unarticulated weight. Within the opulent confines of palace walls, Diana, Princess of Wales, had a life that many would want. However, under the facade of idyllic romance and public admiration, her soul often quaked under the oppressive burden of obligation and treachery. Her smiles, immortalized in countless images, masked secrets capable of destabilizing the monarchy. These were realities she divulged only in parts to her most loyal confidants. Her existence was not only a narrative of a failed marriage, it was a complex maze of secrets and resilience. Diana often expressed her profound fears via letters, each word imbued with melancholy and implicit cautions. Diana reportedly hinted to acquaintances, including her former butler Paul Burrell and close confidant Rosa Monckton, about a revelation too explosive to commit fully to paper. These writings, dispersed throughout her private communications, referenced betrayals she could not identify and shadows she could not reveal. A particularly unsettling proposition which has incited discussion for years posits that Prince William's fate may not align totally with the assurances of the crown. The words fell short of a straightforward admission, but they had sufficient gravity to profoundly unsettle readers, bequeathing a legacy of unresolved inquiries that today resonate more intensely than ever. Individuals closest to her remember enigmatic discussions that seemed to resist comprehension. Diana often spoke in enigmas, meticulously considering each word to avoid revelation. "He will require a fortitude they are unable to provide," she allegedly said to a friend, her voice faltering, her intent intentionally obscured. She seemed to be preparing her kid for an eventual encounter with a concealed reality, while simultaneously shielding him from the anguish of premature awareness. The ultimate secret, which she protected with unwavering determination, was a weight she bore until her dying days. Friends said that she maintained secrecy due to the perilous and destabilizing nature of the information, which was too risky to reveal during her lifetime. It was beyond mere potential controversy. It was a question of existence. Disclosing it would have signified an outright declaration of war against the monarchy, and Diana, despite her bravery, recognized that some conflicts could not be confronted directly. She chose to obscure her reality in whispers and leave fragments, clues dispersed like breadcrumbs throughout the turmoil of her existence. The disparity between the persona she exhibited and the reality she endured was excruciating. To the world, she was the people's princess, luminous, empathetic, and resilient. Within the palace, she waged a solitary struggle against alienation and treachery. The monarchy required her to be quiet. Her own heart compelled her to conceal a part of herself. The internal conflict became her most profound anguish. The crown required perfection, but her soul had a flaw that no crown could encompass. Consequently, the murmurs intensified. They traversed the frigid halls of Buckingham Palace, resonating in the ears of courtiers and personnel who thought that Diana's anguish included more than was openly acknowledged. The whispers of treachery and muted discussions of her sorrow and apprehensions forged an invisible legacy. For years, such murmurs pervaded the castle, a perilous undercurrent that could never be fully extinguished. They were interred with her in 1997 or so. The firm had anticipated until a discreet royal decree resurrected the truth. The inconceivable decision. The rationale behind William's consent to the examination. The inquiry now looming over the House of Windsor is a startling one. Why would Prince William, a figure characterized by his fidelity and reticence, consent to a DNA test decades after his mother's demise? The response is as remarkable as the outcome itself. For years, William had suppressed the rumors, persuading himself they were only the malicious fabrications of a sensationalist media. However, a revelation emerged that rendered denial untenable. Sources acquainted with the circumstances indicate that long-forgotten papers were discovered deep inside the royal archives. The documents, which ought to have stayed locked behind layers of dust and formality, were abruptly presented to him as if destiny itself were insisting on accountability. Their contents were disjointed and insufficient, but unmistakably indicated that official skepticism existed about his mother's veracity, skepticism that people in authority were unwilling to reveal. The revelation severely unsettled William. He had always been aware that the monarchy functioned in secrecy, but he never anticipated that such obscurity might encroach upon his own identity. His top advisors, cognizant of the profound significance of these papers, encouraged him to do the one action that might either extinguish the rumors permanently or validate them. They reminded him that the monarchy's endurance relies on the assurance of lineage, asserting that his bloodline was not only a personal concern, but also a fundamental aspect of national identity. For William, this had ceased to pertain to the crown. The subject pertained to his mother. The objective was to commemorate her legacy and save her from the harsh misrepresentations of history. He was ensnared between two intolerable options: save her legacy by concealing the rumors, or jeopardize everything by seeking the truth. The internal conflict overwhelmed him. Night after night, he revisited his mother's comments in his thoughts, remembering snippets of talks in which she had alluded to hidden betrayals. He recalled her eyes laden with an incomprehensible anguish throughout his childhood, and pondered if she had borne this secret, anticipating that he would ultimately confront it in solitude. Seeking the truth meant dismantling his whole existence. Concealing it would be a betrayal of the memories of the lady who had profoundly influenced his essence. Ultimately, he operated in total secrecy. The choice was taken in secrecy, away from the scrutiny of his father, King Charles, and the calculated influence of Queen Camilla. A covert arrangement was established, a clandestine operation, concealed even from the majority of high-ranking royal officials. A secluded high-security laboratory was selected, one far from institutional influence. Confidential associates bound by an oath of secrecy conveyed the specimens under the veil of darkness, guaranteeing the absence of any documentation that may trace back to the prince. This constituted William's own struggle, his individual quest for truth. The following days were oppressive. Each hour elongated into an eternity as he awaited, conflicted between a fervent need for tranquility and an insistent apprehension of validation. What if the examination confirmed his long-standing apprehensions? What if the truth he revealed destroyed not just himself, but the kingdom as well? As the results approached, the pressure on his chest intensified, as if he bore the whole weight of his family's history and the nation's destiny. He allegedly avoided his father, unwilling to meet his gaze, fearful that his own countenance might reveal the turmoil inside. He completely evaded Queen Camilla, immediately recognizing that she above all must remain uninformed. If the reality were as sinister as the murmurs said, she would spare no effort to conceal it once again. The dread intensified, eroding him from inside. He was no longer the reliable heir the obedient prince admired by the world. He was only a son eager to comprehend his mother, but apprehensive that in the process he could lose his own identity. The moment of destruction. A reality in contrasts. Upon the arrival of the findings, a single phrase shattered Prince William's serenity with the intensity of lightning striking glass. The DNA analysis was unequivocal, devoid of technical language that might be manipulated to create uncertainty. It was clear, incontrovertible, and devastating. The lineages that had been upheld, safeguarded, and exalted for generations suddenly lay bare, exposing an irreparable fissure. William, the future king, had to face the inconceivable. His ancestry was not as the monarchy had always proclaimed. The weight of it struck him with unrelenting intensity. For a guy conditioned to embody the quintessential British stiff upper lip, the event shattered his years of indoctrination. His visage contorted, his eyes ignited with emotion, and before he could restrain himself, tears streamed unabated. This was not the subdued sorrow of a youngster lamenting his mother. This was the profound anguish of a man seeing the foundations of his existence crumble instantaneously. He lamented the deceit that had quietly accompanied him from birth, for the treachery that compelled him to doubt everything from the crown he was destined to inherit to the very blood coursing through his veins. However, sorrow swiftly transformed into an explosive fury. Fury at the falsehoods that had shaped his reality. Resentment towards the palace apparatus that had both protected and constrained him. Self-directed ire for supposing that quiet signified stability. His emotions clashed in rapid succession: fury, sorrow, and bewilderment. He wanted to scream, to flee, to incinerate every document, every image, every crown that had ensnared him in a deception. At the core of his rage was a deeper, more profound affliction: sadness. The question plagued him incessantly. Was Diana aware? Was this her ultimate secret? The burden she had borne in secret, either too fearful or too protective to articulate intrusive memories, inundated his consciousness. His mother cautioning him about shadows surrounding the crown, her eyes laden with anguish, her voice quavering as she recounted treachery. Each enigmatic word she had said, every letter imbued with melancholy, suddenly seemed like fragments of a jigsaw he was just starting to comprehend. Did Elizabeth suffer public humiliation, solitude, and misery, not just due to a broken marriage, but because she carried the intolerable reality of William's lineage, the revelation devastated him. He was deceived not just by the monarchy. It constituted his whole basis. His self-perception, his historical significance, and his comprehension of his mother's anguish had all been redefined in a single statement. He succumbed under its weight, his body, quaking his breath, labored as if the truth aimed to obliterate him. What William grasped was not only his own assessment, it represented the monarchy's most significant existential peril. If the heir's ancestry were in doubt, the legitimacy of the crown itself would be at risk. The sanguinary legacy of royal treachery had reached its culmination, and it was now William who bore the burden. A father's wrath, a monarch's trepidation, the encounter with Charles. Upon Prince William's presentation of the findings to King Charles, the walls of Buckingham Palace quaked. The atmosphere became oppressive, laden with the strain of an unarticulated conflict, as father and son positioned themselves on opposing sides of an insurmountable divide. William, his eyes still puffy and his voice trembling but determined, presented the incriminating truth to his father. The ensuing stillness was intolerable, extending into a stifling abyss, until Charles eventually responded not with compassion, but with incredulity that swiftly transformed into fury. His repudiation was prompt and incisive. He said that it was inconceivable that the outcomes must be false, and that William had been influenced by entities intent on undermining the monarchy. His voice, often calm and deliberate, faltered with a tumultuous blend of rage and apprehension. However, underneath the fervent complaints, an unsettling stillness persisted. It was the quiet of a man who acknowledged the specter of a reality he had long wished to remain buried. The denial quickly escalated into a more sinister manifestation. In a private outburst, Charles allegedly erupted, demanding complete confidentiality and ordering the issue to be suppressed immediately. He warned of a scandal so catastrophic it may completely topple the monarchy. His remarks conveyed the tangible fear of a monarch who had dedicated his life to protecting the crown from destruction, only to discover the most significant danger emerging from his own lineage. The monarchy was ill-equipped to endure such a disclosure, and Charles was aware of this fact. His wrath was aimed not just at William, but also at the specter of Diana, who persisted in haunting his rule from beyond the dead. In the midst of this tempest, William maintained his position. The despair of his father exacerbated the injury. He saw not a father safeguarding his kid, but a monarch defending a throne at whatever cost. The conflict between his allegiance to the crown and his devotion to Diana's memory fragmented him. Each phrase said by his father distanced him from the monarchy's austere confines and drew him nearer to his mother's heritage. At that moment, William was not a prince striving to uphold tradition. He was a son betrayed by the one person who ought to have been his support. The constant presence of Queen Camilla loomed behind this encounter. Although absent in person, her influence permeated all aspects. William saw her hand in the urgent need for quiet, her meticulous maneuvers intricately interlaced inside every facet of royal politics. It seems she had been poised for this moment, prepared to extinguish the blaze before it devoured everything she had achieved. William found the prospect of Camilla profiting from the same falsehoods that led to his mother's ruin almost intolerable. The dispute concluded without settlement, resulting only in further estrangement. William departed from his father not with resolutions, but with the dreadful realization that the monarchy would resort to any means to suppress him. His father's rejection was both personal and institutional. The crown was in conflict with the truth, and William was compelled to assume the dual role of adversary and guardian. Section 5. The Guardian of Secrets. The Disclosure of Princess Anne. If King Charles dreaded revelation, it was Princess Anne who would tell William that the truth cannot be concealed indefinitely. For years, Anne had harbored remnants of Diana's secret. Now, with her nephew shattered, she advanced with disclosures that only she could authenticate. For an extended period, she has served as the silent guardian of her family, refraining from pursuing notoriety or soliciting compassion. However, she was among the few royals to whom Diana felt she could confide during her most difficult times. As a sister-in-law, Anne saw her not as an adversary or an issue, but as a delicate young lady overwhelmed by the burden of betrayal. During those tranquil, clandestine moments late at night when the palace was enveloped in solitude, Diana spoke words that indelibly etched themselves into Anne's mind. Anne remembered how Diana's voice would quaver as she spoke of the life in which she felt ensnared. These were not admissions intended for gossip. They were appeals for comprehension. Amidst the hushed conversations emerged a haunting declaration that Anne had never forgotten. One day, William will require the complete truth. At that moment, Anne refrained from probing more intuitively, seeing the danger inherent in Diana's words. However, the burden of that solitary promise tormented her, a foretelling she had fervently wished would never materialize. As William stood disheartened by the DNA findings, Anne moved forward, her voice composed but imbued with grief. She informed him of Diana's previous revelation, that some facts were too explosive to articulate yet intended for him to bear when the appropriate moment arrived. She reminded him that his mother's quiet was not an act of cowardice, but rather a protective measure until he had the strength to confront the reality. For Anne, the obligation of disclosing these pieces was not concerned with scandal or authority. It was about steering her nephew through adversity. Their connection intensified throughout such instances. William, who had always seen his aunt as a resolute embodiment of obligation, suddenly saw her as a conduit to his mother's affection. She implored him to refrain from succumbing to despair or anger and to commemorate Diana's legacy by accepting the truth. However, despite her attempts to comfort him, Anne's tone became serious. She cautioned William that the palace forces committed to safeguarding the crown would never let this disclosure emerge. The very apparatus that attempted to quiet Diana would stop at nothing to stifle this truth. She reminded him that power is never relinquished voluntarily. A queen's gambit. Camilla's conflict with a phantom. Upon hearing rumors of the DNA findings, terror infiltrated Queen Camilla's meticulously crafted existence. The monarchy had consistently served as her arena, with each advancement toward the throne achieved via strategic planning and resolute perseverance. However, Diana's name, previously obscured by formality and the passage of time, was resurfacing, propelled by William's emotions and the reality he would not suppress. For Camilla, this was not only a familial issue, it was an existential danger to her sovereignty. She did not squander any time. Discreet discussions were held in muted voices. Reliable friends and devoted courtiers were convened. Their objective, simple but significant, manage the repercussions. The very proposition that William's ancestry would be scrutinized had the potential to incite a conflagration that might engulf the kingdom. Within that smoke, Camilla's meticulously acquired crown would disintegrate into ashes. Her apprehension included not just controversy, but also obliteration. If Diana's secret were validated, Camilla's reign would be perpetually eclipsed by the lady she had endeavored for so long to supplant. Desperation compelled her to do perilous actions. Sources indicate that Camilla initiated efforts to undermine William's credibility. Subtle insinuations circulated within certain circles, suggestions that his sorrow had impaired his judgment, rendering him too emotional and too unstable to be deemed trustworthy. Each tear he wept was contorted into a weapon directed at him. The story she propagated was both ruthless and deliberate. William, besieged by the specter of his mother, was yielding to hallucination. This represented Camilla at her most duplicitous. She had endured public disdain and the animosity of Diana's legacy, but this was a new arena of conflict. Each action she undertook was intended to stabilize the crown upon her head, even at the cost of undermining the reputation of the man poised to inherit it. However, William was not a youngster to be subdued by rumors. His quiet was not a sign of weakness, it was an expression of determination. Camilla's desperation intensified his resolve, as each of her actions evoked memories of the apparatus that had sought to silence his mother. The prince's sorrow. The nation's desolation. Upon his next public appearance, Prince William's poise had dissipated. The world has become familiar with his composed tone and dignified composure. On this day, his eyes were laden with grief, and his movements were wobbly. The assembled crowd anticipated a prince, but instead saw a boy burdened by the oppressive presence of his mother's specter. His voice faltered as he started to speak. He did not articulate his thoughts as a successor upholding tradition. He expressed himself as a son whose existence had been shaped by deceit. He candidly acknowledged his sorrow, admitting that he had never comprehended the extent of his mother's anguish until this moment. For a moment he almost succumbed, his voice wavering, as the audience remained in shocked stillness. Subsequently, he made his promise. Amidst tears, William vowed that Diana's legacy would endure, and her truth would not be obscured. He said that regardless of the expense, he would guarantee her voice was acknowledged. The commitment resonated with everybody who had ever adored Diana. The effect of his candor was instantaneous and profound. The British audience, used to meticulously crafted pronouncements, was astonished by the candidness of his admission. His tears were not a sign of frailty, they were an epiphany. After decades, the gap between the crown and the populace diminished. William transcended his role as the future king. He became Diana's son, a manifestation of a truth penetrating barriers of silence, the conclusive correspondence, an ongoing revelation. Nevertheless, while William's tears marked the immaculate representation of the monarchy, one last secret concealed deeper than the others threatened to alter history once more. Just when it seemed that Diana's ultimate secret had been disclosed, a concealed document surfaced. A sealed letter in Diana's distinctive handwriting was discovered in her personal archives, bearing the burden of unresolved admissions. Its very presence was sufficient to evoke a fresh wave of shivers throughout the castle. If the DNA disclosure had fractured the monarchy, this correspondence threatened to destroy it completely. Embedded within its lines were indications of a more profound plot, implying that the truth William had revealed was but one strand in a far broader tapestry of deceit. William immediately felt the burden. It was as if his mother continued to communicate with him, compelling him to confront issues she had been unable to engage in herself. Anne's enigmatic admonition resonated more profoundly than ever. Your mother possessed knowledge beyond what anyone comprehended. The populace also perceived it. Speculation proliferated rapidly, engendering a turmoil that no royal edict could restrain. Thus, what started as a son's lamentation over a DNA test has culminated in a poignant reminder. The prevailing inquiry about a destabilized monarchy is no longer the nature of Diana's secret, but rather the quantity of further secrets she may have concealed, and if the monarchy which has endured for a century can withstand their disclosure. The narrative seems to be far from concluded. Thank you for watching the video. Please let us know your thoughts, and goodbye for now.